Hi, I'm Kathy with the Delafield Quilt Company, and if you're new here, I love quilting and I love sharing the projects that I'm working on and how I made them. For this video, I'm going to show how I made this houndstooth quilt. This is a fat quarter friendly, very easy quilt to make, and we use the strip tube method to make these squares super quick. So I hope that you like the video. The tools that we need to create this quilt are going to be a square ruler. It needs to be at least a 5" by 5" square ruler or bigger. I'm using a 6.5" because I don't have a 5" square ruler. I'm not really sure if they're out there, but I'm using the one that I have next biggest size. And then you also need a long straight edge ruler and your rotary cutter. The overall size of this quilt is 49 inches by 58 inches, and the fabric that you need are 8 fat quarters of red fabric and 8 fat quarters of white fabric. For the binding, about a ½ yard, and backing fabric about 3.5 yards. So the fat quarters I'm using today are all from the Anna collection by Laundry Baskets. I'll put a link to that information in the show notes. And so I've got my fat quarters, they're pinks and reds because I wanted this to be more of a Valentine's Day quilt. And then for my white fat quarters, those are more of an off-white with a little bit of accents of pink in there as well. All right, let's get started. We're going to cut this all at once. I'm going to show you how I'm going to cut it, just to hopefully save some time for you if you decide to do this quilt. And basically, I'm going to start with 2 of the red fat quarters. I'm going to set these others aside. And I'm going to get them so they're stacked up on top of each other and the edges lined up as best as I can. And then for these first 2, we're going to cut 2 5" strips for the long length of the fat quarter. And then we're going to subcut those strips into 5" squares. And then we're going to cut 3 2 3/8" strips also from the long side of the fat quarters. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure I have a clean edge to work with. Okay, and once you have your clean edge, I'm going to go ahead and cut then the 2 5" strips. I'm just going to stack those strips together and just set them aside. I'll cut them in a second. And then I'm going to cut the 3 2 3/8" strips. All right, so I've got my strips cut. And I'm going to cut down these 5" ones into 5" squares. And I'm just stacking them together. I'm going to try to do it all at once. Just going to make sure I'm starting with a nice clean edge. And then I'm going to cut my 5" squares. And from each 5" roll, you should get 4 5" squares. And you're going to repeat that for 2 of the white fat quarters. And then you're going to grab 5 more red fat quarters. And I'm going to cut these probably in a stack of 2 and then a stack of 3. And from the 5 of the red fat quarters, we're going to cut 1 5" strip, and then subcut those into 5" squares, and then 5 2 3/8" strips. And then we're going to repeat that with 5 of the white fat quarters. And then finally, from your last white fat quarter and your last red fat quarter, we're just going to cut 5 2 3/8" strips. And I'm just going to stack these 2 together since there's only 1 of each, and get these cut as well. Now that we've got all of our pieces cut out, we're going to go ahead and sew the strips together that we're going to need to create the diagonal stripe blocks. So to do that, you just take 1 white strip, 1 red strip, 1 white, and 1 more red strip. And we're going to just sew these 4 together using a 1/4" seam allowance. Okay, so I've got my strips sewn together. And then the next step is I'm going to press the seams to one side, and then I'm going to turn this over to the other side, and I'm going to just connect it with the bottom and do a 1/4" seam here. So I'm essentially just going to make a tube. So now I've got a couple of these sets of strips that are sewn into tubes, and I'm going to show you how we're going to cut these up pretty quickly to make the diagonal squares that we need for this quilt. If you're not familiar with strip tube quilting, it's a pretty neat method that allows you to use strips of fabric sewn together, and then you make them into a tube like I did, and then you cut them apart either using a square triangle You kind of turn it as you go so you maximize your strips here, or you can use one of the many special rulers out there that are used for tube quilting. If you're interested in seeing another project like this, I do have one out there that I'll link in the show notes. That's actually to one that I used jelly roll strips. And I used a special jelly roll strip ruler for that one. But in this one, I'm going to just show you how to use a normal square ruler. So to do this, we need to make sure we have our square ruler. It needs to be at least 5 inches. Again, mine's 6.5. And we're going to cut this section basically so that we end up with 5-inch squares. So to do this, I'm going to take my ruler and I need to know where both of the 5-inch marks are on this ruler. And I'm going to line those 5-inch intersection points right onto the seam allowance at the bottom of this tube. You just need to make sure that those 2 points are right on there. It may be helpful to put maybe a piece of painter's tape along here just so you have it consistent. You don't have to keep kind of guessing where those spots are, but not necessary, and you can try either way you like. So I've got my 2 points lined up, and then I'm just going to carefully cut down one side, and then I'm going to cut down the other side. And then when I pull my ruler away and I open up this, I should have a perfect 5-inch square. And then you're just going to repeat that process. You're going to turn your ruler so it's going the other direction. You're going to line up the 5-inch mark again on your seam allowance, on the top seam allowance this time. And then since this was cut pretty cleanly, it doesn't look like I need to cut that. And then I'm just going to cut down this side. And then I've got my second one. And then I'm just going to keep doing that on this strip. You should get 4 of these for each set of 4 strips. And then just like that, I've got 4 of these diagonal stripe blocks. Now I'm just going to cut a few more of these and then I'll show you how to put this quilt together. So this quilt is made up of 13 rows. And the first row starts with one of these diagonal squares, and we're going to start with the red at the top, and then we're going to use a white square, another diagonal square, again the red one, in this case I guess pink at the top, and then you're just going to keep alternating in that fashion until you've got 6 of these diagonals and 5 of these white squares. I'm going to go ahead and get started on the next row, which starts with a 5-inch red square, and then a diagonal square, but we're going to have the white be at the top corner there. Another 5-inch red, and then same thing with the diagonal, white at the top, and then a 5-inch square. In the second row, you're going to have 6 of the red squares and 5 of the diagonal squares. And then for the third row, you're going to start again like you did the first. Have your diagonal square with the red on the top, a white square, another diagonal square again with the red on the top, and then another white square, and then another diagonal square. So you can kind of see how the houndstooth is coming together. Basically, you're going to just repeat this process, and you just want to make sure you have these turned in a way that the whites line up with the bottom of a white square. And then the same with the reds. The red corners are going to line up with the bottom of a red square. And that gives you that nice little houndstooth look. So that's pretty much it, how to make the blocks for this quilt and put the rows together. I hope that you liked this video. If you haven't yet, please visit us at delafieldquiltco.com and subscribe.